Amber and I are going to be doing this together. And we are going to be presenting information that's applicable to both California and Colorado. And we're going to try to split apart a little bit of our details when we start talking about contracts or certain procedures. So generally what we're going to do is just go through the seller's process when you're working with a seller. And right now we're kind of like, we're starting right where Jiro stopped. Jiro presented a nice presentation last week regarding like how to get the listing. And now we're, coming on and we're assuming that, great, we've got the listing. And then these are the things that we need to think about when we're representing sellers. Here are some of the topics that we'll be discussing. First of all, why do people want to be listing agents? Everybody wants to have the listing. And what's the difference between representing a seller and representing a buyer? We can talk a little bit about preparation and how to highlight the property features. We're going to talk a little bit about doing paperwork, the listing agreement, and the seller disclosures. We're going to be discussing a little bit about how to do an open house, brokers tours, and showings, and do those successfully. We're going to talk about where do you market your property, some ideas on what's typically done when you're marketing a property, and then what some of the bonus things you could do to best present your property. We're going to talk about how to review offers and handle multiple offers if you're lucky enough to have that happen. It's great. A couple of steps on getting through the escrow process, closing steps, things that you need to do in order to get the property closed and get your final things done. And then after the sale, we have a list of things that you should be doing in order to kind of keep in touch with your client for client retention purposes. And hopefully by the end of this session, you will feel confident in your ability to support sellers throughout the property preparation process and the post-sale process. Okay. List to last. This is a great question. Why does everybody want to be a listing agent? What is different about being a listing agent, you guys? And I think everybody knows that if you're the listing agent, eventually, hopefully your property is going to sell and you'll be getting paid. So it seems like it's a lot more of a sure thing than representing a buyer. And sometimes we think that buyers are a lot of work because we have to take them out and show them properties and, write a bunch of offers. And, when you're a seller's agent, it's a bunch of work, but it's a different kind of work. So it's still a lot of work that you have to do to represent a seller. You want to do things, obviously, in the best interest of the seller, and you're going to have to do some counseling. They think different than buyers, right? They think that their property is worth a lot of money. They don't realize that sometimes there's preparation that has to be done. Sometimes they don't realize all the effort that goes into coordinating, getting things done. Okay, so
I've always been told that when we're listing properties, Rebecca, that our clients are not just our sellers, but it's also our clients are the other agents that are out there with the buyers that are sitting in the back of their car or on the end of their phone. So I'm really, at that point, I'm working with two different customer clients. It's the seller themselves and also all of the other brokers out there that you all have buyers for this particular property. So I look at it as a twofold marketing technique.
Right, exactly. Yeah, definitely. You're definitely trying to please everybody, I think. So the other part about being a listing agent that a lot of people don't realize is different than a buyer's agent is you definitely want to have a schedule and you need to do a lot of project managing. Okay, and that's going to depend, of course, on the level of preparation that you're going to do. If you have to do a lot of preparation, then you may want to consider perhaps counseling the sellers to talk to one of our Radius Edge project managers, and we can talk a little bit about that when we get to our preparation stage. But you definitely want to keep in mind that you need to keep the ball rolling, keep things moving ahead. You also need to have effective communication because you're obviously communicating with all the vendors and the painters and the stagers, but like Amber said, you're definitely still communicating with the buyer's agents and you're communicating with the seller. So it's almost like you have all these balls in the air and you have to remember to try to, think ahead about what you can do to make it go smoother for yourself sometimes. Effective communication is huge. You need to treat everybody fairly and honestly. And I think that unfortunately, a lot of listing agents get a bad reputation because they maybe aren't communicating effectively, and therefore other buyers agents are thinking that they're not getting treated fairly, or maybe perhaps sometimes people don't treat each other fairly, which happens. But you, as a listing agent, you really want to remember that your reputation, for between you and the other agents, and then you and your client, you always want to treat everybody fairly and honestly, because that's really important. And your integrity is going to be the best thing that you're going to carry with you no matter where you go, right? And then you also have to manage your expectations, and you have to navigate through the process of a successful close. So not only do you need to get all these balls in the air, then you got to have the property ready, and then you need to go through the rest of the transaction. Hopefully there aren't any things to overcome. Amber, do you want to do a slide for us? That would be
sure.
great.
Actually, this particular one, I love it because it's the preparation of the property. And I think this is the really exciting point where you can sit down and talk with your sellers and say, let's be proactive to help make sure that this selling process is smooth and successful. And so, every home has these little tidbits that you should probably go in and either fix, repair, take a look at, spruce up, enhance before you get it on the market. So I always walk through the properties with my sellers, and number one, I'll suggest that we do a pre-inspection. I am not an inspector, nor do I ever claim to be one. So if we can get the sellers on the proactive side and have them go ahead and hire and actually pay a professional licensed inspector, then they can go ahead and pull out and show any sort of situations or pull out anything that may be an issue down the road. So they can say, hey, I've seen this and I think we need to take care of it. So for example, the sink in the bathroom is leaking, slow leak, little drip, not a problem. If we can get that taken care of prior to listing, then when the buyers come through, even if they're just looking at walking through the property on a showing, they don't open those cupboards and go, oh, there's a slow leak, because their mind then goes to that the rest of the property has not been well taken care of. This way, it's not me telling the sellers that they need to repair it. It's a professional certified licensed inspector that can come in and say that and advise the sellers to do that. A lot of times it allows me to have more leverage to get them to actually take care of some of those items prior to closing. It gives them the opportunity to repair, place the items before the listing itself. Sometimes it takes a little bit of time to get the subcontractors in. Again, we can use the pre-inspection as a marketing tool. So we can put that in our features description. We can say, hey, it already has been pre-inspected, have this listed as one of the items in our home book. So while people are there at the home, they can go ahead and take a look at what has already been seen through a professional inspector's eyes. And this truly helps eliminate, quote, surprises along the way.
Right. And I think that the more disclosure you give to the buyer, it makes the buyer feel so much more comfortable knowing that, they're giving more information versus less information. So, encouraging pre-inspections is something that we like to do. Sometimes the sellers don't want to do pre-inspections, but if you can kind of convince them or kind of tell them why it's a good thing to have that, then most of the time they will agree to it. Okay.
Yeah, and this one's a little bit redundant, but repairs and cosmetics, again, it allows contractors to come and repair those, complete those items that may need taken care of. Again, window washing, yard cleanup, etc. It helps eliminate any items that may come up as points of contention or objections during the inspection objection process. And it helps keep the home in the optimum condition. So when people are walking through, they just feel like, hey, it has been cleaned, it has been picked up, the yard's been trimmed, it looks really nice. It's going to be much more appealing for somebody on a merchandising standpoint, not just on a marketing standpoint. And then staging, again, kind of goes hand in hand with merchandising. It dresses up the home. You can accent certain features. It can show spatial relations of where furniture might go, what the room sizes actually are. And it also can help the property stand out from other homes. I have owned a staging company, and we used to go in and do theme staging. So for example, if the house was on Cheetah Drive, we actually did the cheetah theme throughout the entire home. So people would remember that when they're going out This was back in the day when we had more inventory than right now, but you know, you might take a buyer out and see 15, 20 homes before they actually write an offer. This way it would actually help stand out just a little bit. So.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and then staged homes always photograph better.
Always. Yeah. So much better.
Uh-huh. And then, you know, just recently, I have had an appraiser suggest that I have floor plan sketches done. And I had always thought that it was pretty expensive, but it's really very cost effective to go ahead and have them come in. They will come in and measure the property. So I don't have to get my measuring tape out. They will draw the floor plan. It gives us an accurate source for square footage, and it also creates another benefit that you can add into your marketing brochures, your flyers, and online marketing.
People love the floor sketches. I think here in the Bay Area, they're always asking for them. If the listing hasn't provided one, then they want one. So,
Yep.
Okay, this is a fun slide, you guys, and I just threw this in this morning. I wanted to kind of give you an example of a calendar that you can use when you are talking to your seller client about how things are going to happen in the next couple of weeks. Maybe your calendar is going to be a couple of months. You know, it totally is what is ever up to the seller's needs, right? But what I used to like to include in my listing presentations was this example calendar. And I would tell the seller client that we would obviously adjust any of these timeframes based on their needs. And it kind of gives the sellers this visual idea of how things are going to happen. Okay. And so you can obviously spread out the time between getting your quotes for your work and then getting your work done. But what I always like to tell my sellers is that we want to pick a date for when we're going to be on the market, and we're going to shoot for that date. Right. And then once we have that date that's going to work for them, maybe it's a month away or whatever, depending on how much prep they need. But you need to pick a date to be on the market, and then you need to work backwards from that. Okay. So you need to say, great, we're going to shoot for having it in the MLS by, like, you know, Friday, whatever, Friday the 10th or Friday the 19th on this calendar. But I'm sorry, the 12th, but whatever. So you just choose a date and you work backwards, because then you can say, okay, it's going to take me however many days to get my photos. It's going to take me however many days to put it into my social media, to actually print my professional property brochure. You need to give yourselves a couple of days. And then you schedule your photographer within that time frame. And then you kind of work backwards and you see how much prep you have to do. Okay. And so clients like this kind of calendar when you give it to them. And this also kind of it kind of sets their expectations, especially if you're going to be doing open house on the weekends. And keep in mind that this particular calendar we were using for San Francisco, where we do things like, you know, evening catered twilight open houses and Saturday previews for neighbors and really involved marketing. So this is all on here. This is definitely something that you could create for yourself and use in your listing presentations. And sellers love this because it makes you look very organized, and it also sets their expectations for, you know, their deadlines for getting things done. Okay.
I love that, Rebecca. Thank you.
Yeah. I thought that this was a really good tool in communicating with your seller clients. They like this kind of stuff. Okay. Okay, final slide on how to highlight your property features. One of the things that I like to do is I want to ask my seller, like, what did they like about the property? Why did they buy the property? What did they like about living there? You know, anything that they can tell me that's positive about living in the property, and anything special that they feel that they want us to focus on in our marketing text. Okay. And then what I would do is I would write a rough draft of the marketing text. And this is one of the hardest parts for me, is actually being that descriptive. And so if you ever get yourself stuck, you can hire people to do this for you. But what you want to do is you want to take your marketing text and you want to send it to the seller, and you want to say, hey, can you please edit or approve this? I won't be offended. You know, tell me if you'd like to embellish it. Obviously, you want to control them. You don't want them to go too long. You have to explain that you have size restrictions for your MLS. But what it does is it gives the seller the opportunity to have some input. And they like that. They like to be able to feel like, you know, at least you're asking them if they want to approve the marketing text. Okay. And then you create your full color brochure or your flyer using your marketing text. You're going to create what I like to call a features sheet. Okay, and so this is just a nice, maybe perhaps a detailed list of, features in the property that the seller would like to highlight, special things that perhaps a buyer wouldn't notice unless you call them out and tell them. And so we would leave a feature sheet next to the brochures. The other thing that I like to kind of do is either a seller's highlight sheet. And so you can ask the seller to write up a separate piece of paper if you feel that they're getting really, they want these really descriptive paragraphs about their property. Then you can ask them, okay, this is great. I love it that you want to do this, but let's put it on a separate sheet. And you can write, why do you love the property so much? Right. You could also add details about the neighborhood and the restaurants and the markets and the transportation and the ability to get on highways or anything like that. So give the seller an opportunity to kind of participate in the marketing if they want to.
Rebecca, our title companies are really good about providing that kind of information as well. So I just know that if you're ever needing that kind of information, they'll send you over that info too. So if your sellers don't have it, but they do want it, like I said, in a home book, typically I'll ask them to send that to me as well.
Yeah, great idea. The other thing, I didn't put it on here, but I just wanted to say, since we're talking about this is another good idea is if you have a condominium listing and you're in a building and it has HOA dues and it has restrictions on pets or restrictions on rentals, how many units are there in the building? Is there parking? Like what I like to do is a frequently asked questions list. And so in addition to my flyer in my brochure, I'm going to have an FAQ page. Okay. And so that's something that goes along, and that FAQ pages work really well when you're going to get these common questions when you're perhaps in a condominium complex or selling something with a homeowners association. Okay.
Absolutely.
Once again, have a neighborhood map with restaurants and parks, kind of know where the parks are if anybody asks. And if you need to know about transportation, know a little bit about the transportation in the area. This is a good one. Make laminated signs and place cards next to them, next to the feature that you want to highlight. Like for example, if you have a jetted tub, you might want to make a little sign that says jetted tub, because people may not look and notice it. Or something where there's, like laundry behind this door. I have a listing right now that has this little hidden storage door, and you wouldn't know that there's a huge storage room back there. So I put a little sign on the door that said, push this door to see the storage back here, So, I mean, it was really nicely done, because then I didn't have to leave the big ugly door open, but someone could just look and saw that there was storage back there.
It's interesting, as I was showing a property the other day, and there was a little door right after the front entrance, and I happened to open it, and it was a half bath. And I asked my clients, I said, did you guys even see this? Because I almost missed it. And they said, no, we thought it was just a coat closet. Yeah. That would have been a perfect opportunity for somebody to just, put a little sign on there, because, people like myself don't always open all of those, and we would have missed a complete half bath on that main level.
Yeah, right. Yeah, you never know where there's going to be a half bath hidden.
Exactly.
Obviously, we're going to want to describe the features of the property in our advertising as much as we possibly can, depending on what our space limitations are. We want to stage around special features. Amber, you put this one in here. Do you do staging around special features?
Yeah, actually, again, like I said, with my staging company, we would do these things so that it wouldn't just look like an empty fire pit sitting outside. We'd create the whole like s'mores basket, and maybe even have it sitting by the sliding glass door as they're walking out, so that they would remember, like, hey, just remember, you can have s'mores around your fire pit in the evenings, things like that, so that people will remember. Right. Rather than just, oh, it's just another backyard. But we used to do lots of fun things like that.
Yeah, I think that's great. I think it creates the desire to have that lifestyle. When you are giving them that hint of, this is what you could be doing in this house if you bought this house, right? So yes. Creating that desire of having a certain lifestyle is definitely a good, effective way of marketing.
Yeah, front porches, a lot of people have this connotation with lemonade on the front porch. And so we would always do, even the fake pictures of lemonade or with lemons and stuff sitting out on the front porch next to these, swings or what have you. So those kinds of things are always helpful.
Yeah. Another thing you can do to highlight your property is you can create a home book, and you can put in seasonal photos of the property, whether it's blooming or covered in snow. But definitely try to highlight the property as best you can, especially if maybe the property is a luxury property, or maybe it has some interesting history. Those are the kind of things that you might want to call out and make sure that people know.
I had to throw the snow picture in there to represent Colorado.
Great. I love it. Okay, you guys, so this is the part where we're going to talk a little bit about things that are going to be state by state, and I'll try to keep it short just so we don't, lose the Colorado people or the California people. So I just want to talk really quickly about the paperwork that goes into taking a listing. Okay, so here in California, the first thing you want to do is definitely make sure that the seller or the person you're talking to, has the authority to sell the house. Like who's on title, right? You want to definitely go to the tax records. And of course, you'll probably be doing this when you're going to your pre-listing presentation, just to make sure you know who you're talking to, right? At that time, you need to make sure that it's a real person, not an entity. An entity would be a corporation or an LLC or a trust. Okay, so in California, if the property is held as an entity, you need to tie a real person to that entity, which is the signature capacity person, right? So that's why everybody always says you have the RCSD form, which is the representative capacity signature disclosure. And that's going to represent a seller. Okay, so I always throw this in here because this is one of the ones that people miss in California. And then you're going to use the residential listing agreement exclusive bundle of documents. And the reason I put exclusive is, remember, here in California, we have 3 different listing agreements that we could choose from, but we like to use the exclusive because that is making the agency relationship between you and that seller an exclusive opportunity for you to market that property. Okay, now we can talk a little bit more about listing agreements when we talk about our contract documents, but we won't be doing that here. If you want to learn about that, you can attend the contract document classes in a couple of weeks. Okay, so in our residential RLA bundle of documents, and I call it a bundle is because the CAR is already bundled together all of these documents, and I'm sure you guys probably are all aware of this. But I want to just call it out that the reason that they do this is to obviously make it convenient for us so that we have all of these things in one package. Okay. And so these are the documents that you need in order for a seller to hire you to sell their house. And so I usually take a copy of a listing agreement when I go to my listing presentation, because as Jiro said in his class last week, is you really want to walk out of that property with a signed listing agreement. That's the best case scenario. You don't want anybody else to have a shot at it. Okay. So take these documents with you, print out a copy, take them and mark them up with yellow highlighter where the seller needs to initial, right? And you can fill in as much as possible if you want. Maybe you might know a price. Anyway, there's just the documents that you need. And so you also most likely are going to need what we call a SELM, SELM form, and that's the seller's exclusion from the MLS. Okay, so usually if you take a listing, according to your local associations, whichever one you belong to, you have a certain number of days to put that property into the MLS. And usually I believe it's 2 or 3 days, depending on your MLS rules here in California. So probably you're not going to get that listing into the MLS because you have to be going through your preparations and all of your things and your brochures and your property photos and everything. So it's very rare that you're going to take a listing and put it right into the MLS, right? So most of the time in California, you should just go right ahead and make that SELM form when you take that listing, okay? Because you're going to need it. And one more thing before we move on is I want to make sure you're using the most updated versions of all the CAR forms. Okay, so the most current listing version is dated August 2021, which was just this year. So, it was just, basically this month. So if you're going to take a new listing, make sure that you're clicking on the transaction icon, new listing, and you're not just copying from an old past listing. Okay, you want to start a new listing with a new template, maybe if you're using a template, but make sure that you're always using the most currently dated forms of anything you're using in the MLS. Thanks. Okay, off to Amber.
Sure, yay. Well, I love that what you went through, Rebecca, is basically what we do as well, only I think we label it a little bit differently. Again, going and asking the title company to pull an O&E for me right off the bat so I know who is in ownership and who can sign. I learned early on in my career when I sat down for a listing agreement one time, I started filling out everything. This is when we would handwrite in everything. And I asked the gentleman in front of me, I said, so are you the owner of the property? And I had gone through this huge, got together my whole listing presentation. He said, oh no, I'm just the tenant.
Oh, no.
And I about died. So, it's one of those that I go, oh, learn from experience. And that's when I went back to my company and my mentor said, don't you remember that part when I said, call the title company and order an O&E? Obviously I'd forgotten, but I don't forget now. So yeah, we need to make sure that whoever's signing that listing contract actually has the authority to do so. And like you said, a corporation, LLC, let's get their operating agreement so that we know when we go to closing, that we've got everything in appropriate alignment for the title company as well, and that we haven't gone into a contract that is non-binding. The next thing that I start off with is definitions of brokerage relationships. I need to be able to talk with my sellers as to how I'm going to represent them. In Colorado, we have seller agency or transaction broker. Most of the time, and my opinion and the advice that I've been given is that we're working on the seller's behalf, so let's call ourselves what we are, a seller's agent, as opposed to being incognito and trying to negotiate on behalf of the seller, but telling ourselves that we're really a transaction broker. So we could go into a whole class on that. But yeah, either or you would check the box if you're going to be working as a seller's agent or a transaction broker. Then from there, I go through showing instructions. Through our showing time, we actually have showing instructions that we can fill in on CTM and on Iris, or we can go into our app on showing time and put those things in. So things like, if the seller has to be notified 3 to 4 hours prior to closing to get the big dogs out of the backyard, we would have that in there as well. Let them know where the lockbox is, those kinds of things. And then I also take with me an MLS feature sheet, either online or actual printed. And that is where we go through and we kind of do the bubble. We ask them, oh, is it a composition roof or is it a tile roof? Do we have PVC piping or do we have steel, the metal piping still, what have you? So we go through and ask those questions to our sellers because I don't always know. I need to know, I can tell you what a 220 outlet is versus a 110. However, it's nice to sit down and ask when I'm sitting there for my listing presentation, because the seller may say, hey, you know what? I actually put in several other 220s in the basement so that I could run extra dryers because I had a daycare in the house. Okay, great. I would not have known that. So those are some of the things that I take with me and that we take with us on our listing presentations.
I think that's a great idea. I love that. And I didn't even touch on the fact of entering the listing into the MLS because, yes, we all have to do that, but, definitely need to hammer out the showing instructions with your clients. If they're going to be remaining in the property, it's always better to set things up in advance. And so that maybe they know that there's going to be an open house this weekend or a broker's tour on this day, and they'll be allowing showings, between certain hours on the other days, or maybe they want to go ahead and we're going to be from the one and whatever. So definitely need to communicate with the client. And then that allows you, like Amber said, to put it into the MLS. And so, you're not kind of running around, willy-nilly trying to figure out, when you're going to show, right? Definitely better to have a schedule. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
And the MLS feature sheet, that's great. I love that. We used to do that here in the Bay Area. We used to have a printed out feature sheet. And I think that's a really good idea, maybe to remember to be very detailed when you're talking to your clients and when you're taking notes, because when you are putting your property listing into the MLS, you don't want to guess on things.
No, and I always find that that's helpful to be able to send over to my TC as well.
Right.
I can take a picture of it, snapshot it, send it so that then they can help me upload that information if I'm having somebody help me with that aspect of inputting my listing.
Yeah, there's always these little details. And that's the thing about representing the seller is you're going to get questions about the property. And, sometimes you don't know, you might have to say, oh, I'm not really sure. Let me check with the seller. But you try not to have to do that too many times. I think, obviously, when we sometimes do property showings, I would tell my first couple through that, oh, if they asked me a question and I wasn't sure, I was like, you are the first people to see this. I haven't found that out yet. That's a great question. Let me talk to the seller and ask, but as you definitely show the property more, then you'll know how to answer some of these questions. But, it's better to be as prepared as you possibly can, for sure. Yeah. Paperwork, seller disclosures. Oh, this is definitely a very involved topic. I'm just going to go through it kind of briefly to give you an overview. If you're going to be getting a listing and you're a newer agent, then we can do some more training. But just as a broad picture, obviously, when you sell a property in California, you have all these required disclosures, okay? And there's state requirements, local requirements, and sometimes broker requirements, okay? So most of the time, the broker requirements are more advisories. All right. And so when you're talking to your seller client, you're going to tell them that you will help them and guide them through all of these wonderful pieces of paper and tell them what everything means. Tell them why it's important for them to give that information to the buyer. I usually tell my clients that once again, 3 different categories of paperwork that I'm going to be working with you on. One of them they're just advisories. It's basically saying that these are things that you should know as a seller, and you just need to sign saying that you've read it and you understand. Then we're going to have the documents that you have to fill out in California. That's like the TDS and the SPQ, but the sellers actually have to answer questions and give their knowledge of the property. Okay. Those are papers that are very important. The TDS is the second most important document in our transaction here in California. The first one is the contract. Okay. So you're going to have advisories, you're going to have disclosures, and then you're going to have contract documents. And the contract documents are the things that make things happen. Okay, your contract is what is an important piece of paper. That's obviously a legal document that's making something happen. And then you're going to have your counteroffer, your addenda, and your contingency removals. And those are all those contract documents that are part of the contract. Okay, so it's always easier to kind of think about, your 3 different types of paperwork that you're dealing with. Okay, Radius has a checklist. We have a checklist for California. We also have a checklist for Colorado. You can find that in your Google Drive. If you don't know how to find your checklists in your Google Drive, please reach out to me or Amber. We will show you how to use your G Drive. It's really important. Okay. You go to your Radius checklist, you're like, oh, I have a single family, and these are the documents that I need when I'm selling a single family. And then you can say, oh, well, perhaps I have a multi-unit building. These are the documents that I need for that situation. So you're going to match your checklist, and then you're going to look at what you need. You're going to talk to your transaction coordinator if you're working with a transaction coordinator, and you're going to say, I have this great new listing. I entered my new file submission sheet. Now we have it in the system. I'm going to send you my signed listing agreement. And then from there, you're going to talk to your transaction coordinator about how that transaction coordinator is going to help you put together your paperwork for you to give to the seller to complete. Okay, because it's going to be blank disclosures, and then the seller has to complete the disclosures. Okay, if your seller is going to be communicating with your TC, or if your TC is going to be obviously sending things to the seller, you're going to want to give an introduction. You just don't want to say, here, Mr. Seller, sign these documents. You really need to be in control of the flow of information. And so, introduce your TC to your client, and then the TC will kind of go from there. Okay. Once again, you want to talk to your client about the type of things that they're going to be signing. Okay, tell them the difference between advisories and disclosures that you have to fill out. Okay, here in California, one of the things that we like to use if you are working with a tech savvy seller client who knows computers, who's able to go and enter things into the internet and answer questions on a keyboard, it's not that hard. We have this program called glide.com, and that allows you to have your seller fill out your SPQ and your TDS and your earthquake hazards report, all the ones that they have to answer questions to. Glide kind of walks them through question by question, and it gives them a chance to type an answer. And then it populates into our TDS forms. It's really cool. If you guys haven't used Glide here in California when you're representing a seller, that's actually a nice tool to use. Okay. And then you can pull the TDS once they're completed and put it in your disclosure package or send it to your TC. We'll just want to say, don't ever fill out the disclosures yourself. Let the sellers always fill out the disclosures. We don't want to be touching any piece of pens or anything, or, we really don't want to be doing any disclosure filling out. It's too much of a liability. Okay. Even if it's perhaps an elderly person and they like, I can't fill this out, you're trying to fill out by hand, to have them find someone to help them fill it out. As an agent, we don't want to be doing that. Okay, so you're going to be sure to include everything that's pertinent to your situation. So for instance, you're going to want to know if you are selling a house that is in a trust, you're going to need your trust advisory. Perhaps you've got tenants, you're going to need your tenancy information and your estoppels and your leases. If you are in an area that has local disclosures, I know every county in the Bay Area has a local disclosure, a county disclosure, but sometimes there's also a city or a town local disclosure, like Oakland sidewalk and sewer lateral ordinance has its own form. So basically what you need to do as a listing agent is you need to find out, what do you need to know about listing property in that location? Okay. Right here, I have written historic disclosures. Radius is such a new brokerage that perhaps this hasn't happened yet. But just so you guys know, what historic disclosures are here in California is if you as an agent represented that seller previously as a buyer and bought that property, and you have old TDS forms or old inspections, if the seller has any of that, then they should provide it. But if you as the agent represented them, but you have to be at the same brokerage, okay? If you represented them in a previous transaction at the same brokerage, you have to provide historic disclosures. Your broker has to pull those old disclosures and you have to provide those. That hasn't happened to us, I don't think, because we're such a new brokerage that unless we have a buyer who, a buyer's agent who then has that person sell, I don't think that's happened to us. But just be aware as an agent, and if that agent that has that listing represented that same client when they purchased it and they were at the same brokerage in California, they need to give you those historic disclosures. Okay. Super important. Last thing about disclosures really quickly is make sure that your TDS is always filled out, completely filled out. You can't miss any boxes. Okay. You can't miss any of 3 boxes in section 1 where it talks about supplemental disclosures. You can't miss filling out your AVID. Your AVID has to be done. Otherwise the TDS is considered incomplete. And that's a big problem if you get into a transaction and perhaps you're non-contingent and then something happens and they notice that you didn't fill it out, and then they can come back and say, fill it out. And then what does that do? That opens a contingency window. Okay. So TDS has to be completely filled out. Don't miss any answers. And then the AV ID has to be done in California. That's just really, really quickly about disclosures in California. There's so much to know, but it would be way beyond our time frame here. So if you need more help, you're always happy to reach out to me, and we'll be doing, I'm sure, more training on that. So.
Thanks, Rebecca, and I commend you and all of your agents in California because we are much more simplistic than that. And honestly, the earthquake hazard report, I don't know that we'll ever need that, but I will check up in our summit counties. I don't know if we have anything that has to do with avalanche awareness or not. So you piqued my interest. I will call on that. But in Colorado, typically what I do is we have the disclosure forms that we fill out at the time of filling out our exclusive right to sell listing contract. So at that point is when I have my sellers fill out the lead-based paint disclosure for properties that were built prior to 1978. There is also a specific form that is seller's obligations for lead-based paint. If we have that, then they need to fill that out. That's where they check the box and say that they have or have not had a lead-based paint inspection done, that they do or they don't know if there is lead-based paint on their property. And then they will send that over once we're under contract to the buyers, or the buyers agents can download that from our MLS and have their buyers sign it typically at the time of signing the contract. Sometimes it's a little bit later. We do have our own date for that nowadays. It's in our updated forms. And you mentioned that about your updated forms. Our updated forms, we typically have new ones coming out every year. And I just spoke with my cousin, Damian Cox. He is an attorney at law. He is on the forms committee, and we have another new one coming up this next year. So yay, we get to all learn that. But in our disclosures, we have square footage disclosure and our seller's property disclosure. And this is what the seller must fill out. And I always say that that's kind of the checklist. It's sort of like going to a doctor's appointment where you have to fill out all that information of what's working, what's not working, when they replaced something, when they didn't. They are going to know the property better than I will ever know. And also legally, the sellers must fill that out, not the agent. In that seller's property disclosure, we did try to make our forms a little bit more concise. So the forms committee actually added our source of water information into the SPD. If we have that filled out on the SPD, we do not need to have the source of water addendum. But if we don't, we need to have that separate addendum done. So I just always suggest, let's save some paper and some time and do it appropriately the first time on the SPD. We do also have some specific area addenda that may go with the contract. And so the occupancy agreement, for example, in Fort Collins, it's something that we need to have them sign that says that they cannot have any more than 3 unrelated people living in a property at one time. So those kinds of things that may come up very specific to the areas we need to have that filled out as well. Then typically what I do with these disclosures is, like I said, we'll upload them onto our MLS so that then the buyer's agent at that time, they can go in and they can download those. I will also make copies of these and put these in the actual property themselves. So if somebody needs to take that whole packet, I'll have information about, the seller's name, their preferred time of closing, if they want 1 to 3 days after close, or time and date of closing, those kinds of specific information that the buyer's agent will need when they're filling out the contract.
Quick question. I know
Yes.
Here in California, when we have a disclosure package that we give to people, we put a cover sheet on it and we ask that the buyer sign the cover sheet acknowledging that they received these documents. Do you guys have any kind of cover sheet, or do you just want everybody to give this back to you when they get into contract, or is there a time frame to sign things and get back to you? Or
so we have, for example, there is one date in there that we have to have the lead-based paint disclosure sent out over to the buyer, and we must have that before we close. We have to have the buyer's signature on that before we close. Same thing with seller's property disclosure. If either the seller or the buyer refuse to sign it, then we have the agent sign it initially, and that would be on management approval. If we had to go through and close out a file without having signatures on that, we would just make note that it was given to them on such and such a date. But most of the time, buyers and sellers are pretty amicable, and they'll get that signed to us and given back to us. The lead-based paint disclosure is also signed by the buyer's agent as well.
Interesting how it's so similar yet different when it comes to the paperwork. I think California,
Right.
You should see our disclosure packages. I mean, we have so many advisories and so many, disclosures about, specific things. It's very, it can be overwhelming, especially if you're a newer agent. So that's why I say, go with the checklists, make sure you're cross-referencing. It's good to know how to use the checklists. And, even if you're a buyer's agent, you want to make sure that what you've been given is all there. Okay.
Exactly.
So take advantage of the checklist, you guys. Next topic is going to be hosting showings, open houses, and brokers tours. And I could probably give like a whole 45-minute class on just this topic.
Right.
So, we're being, very basic. We're going to try to hit some highlights here. But having the confidence, I think, is going to come after a while. When you're kind of brand new, it's hard to really know what to say, how to answer questions, how to hold yourself, what to do. But the more that you do this, if you're hosting open houses and brokers tours, the easier it's going to become. And then you're going to find that you're good at it and that you like it. And then you'll realize that you're able to get clients because you're good at it and you like it and you know how to talk to people in such a way where you're providing information, but not a lot, but they want more from you. Okay. And that's, basically, obviously, if we're a listing agent, we're there to highlight the house. And so we're going to definitely focus on our job being that listing agent. One of the things that I really like to remind everybody is be on time. And if you can't be on time, at least give people notice if you're meeting people. Obviously, there's emergencies that come up, but you definitely want to be on time or be early. Don't be a no-show without any explanation or cancellation. And I think that that specifically refers to showings. Like if you're going to be showing a property, of course, now we're talking about being a buyer's agent, but just don't not show up. You know, definitely that's not professional, and people remember things like that. And, you know, especially if your clients will remember things like that. Okay. Confirmation of appointments is very important. Get up in the morning and look and see what appointments you have. If you're up early, confirm them the night before. You know, just make sure that you're confirming your appointments for the upcoming day so that everybody knows that you're, you know, supposed to be, you're going to be where you're supposed to be. Okay. Maintain your professionalism. You want to act and dress appropriately. And this is just, you know, obviously find your own style. You know, we're not going to tell you to wear a suit and a tie, because you just have to find what's comfortable for you. But no matter what you're doing, just do it professionally and appropriately. I used to work with a gentleman in San Francisco. He wore a suit and a tie every day to the office, and that was just him. That's just what he did. And, you know, his clients loved him. I don't know if it was because of the suit and the tie, but he just had that, you know, that presence. The other thing that I wanted to mention is if you're a listing agent at an open house, you know, definitely remember that those people who are walking in the door, you know, they could be potential clients for you, right? So you want to make sure that you're giving them a very best impression. The first impression is going to be the best one. Don't be sitting down in an open house. I hate it when I go to an open house and the listing agent's like just sitting there on the couch. You know, just remember you're there to, you know, act professional and highlight that house and get another client. That's the point. For open houses, you need to be early. So, you know, you're always going to need more time than you think. Okay, don't underestimate the traffic. Don't underestimate how long it's going to take you to put your signs out. If your signs aren't prepared and prepped, then you have to do all the prep. You know, here we put the addresses on it and the arrows. You know, you always need to have the things that you need. You have your flyers ready, have any kind of registration cards if you're going to ask people to sign in. You're going to want to come prepared with a list of recent sales nearby, so that if someone asks you about the price, you can show them, well, this house down the street just sold for this. What I call like an informal CMA, or a list of comps. Take that with you. Know the inventory. And then if you want to bring any water bottles or things to hand out, or your hand sanitizer, make sure that you're there early. I have this big toolbox in my car where I have all my stuff, right? And it's like, I just keep it, and I always have whatever I need. I have tape, I have everything in there, but I'm always making sure that I'm early. You can go and you can put your signs out early. You can put your signs out in the morning, depending on your location and your rules of your town. But a lot of people do, they put their signs out early. Okay. When you get to the house, turn on all the lights. I hate it when I go to a house and like all the drapes are closed and the lights are off. You want to turn on all the lights, make it look bright, open up the window coverings, see if there's anything that needs to be tidied up, pick up the mail that's on the floor, you know, sweep the stoop if there's leaves. You know, you want to be that person who's in charge of presenting that house. And so be proud of that house. It's easier to sell something when you're confident and proud of it. Okay. You're going to want to answer questions to the best of your ability. You're going to admit if you don't know the answer to a question, say, hey, that's a great question. I don't know, but let me text the seller and I'll find out. Okay. You definitely want to create a little bit of a separation between you as the agent and the representative and the source of the information that you're telling people. Okay. For instance, and this is the most common one, is someone will say, how many square feet is this property? And you can say it's, you know, 1,200 square feet, according to the tax records, or according to the measurement, or according to the developer or something. But always make sure if you're stating like a square footage or something that could be a material fact, that you're also attributing where you got that information from. Okay, you never want to make that buyer feel that you, the agent, are telling them something directly. You want to say according to somebody or something else. That's very important.
I have to chime in there, Rebecca. One of the most important factors that I was taught years ago was that when people would say, so what's going to be built back there in that open space?
Okay.
And if I don't know, I need to say, I don't know. I have not checked with the city. And most of the time, I really don't know. And even if I had checked with the city, those planned developments may have changed. So that could drastically change somebody's opinion on value of that property. If they think this is open space that's going to be there forever, and I tell them, oh, nothing's ever going to be built there, it could end up in a liability suit because I didn't do my homework. So I love that you're saying that I, make sure we know what we're talking about. And if we don't know, it's okay to say, I don't know.
Right. Exactly. Better to say, I don't know, than it is to answer wrong and get yourself in a lawsuit.
Absolutely.
So here's a topic that we could spend a couple of minutes on, but I linked the link here for you guys. So when you come back and you want to, if you can review this presentation, I'm not going to go to the actual link. I just don't want to, because I think we're trying to keep this moving along. But really, really important for you to pay special attention to your safety when you're going to any vacant houses or holding open houses, holding brokers tours. You need to be aware of your surroundings and you need to take precautions. You need to have a plan in place. If you are ever nervous about a showing, take someone with you, make sure someone knows where you're going and where you've been, your appointments for that day. I was doing a broker's tour here in San Francisco once, and I was upstairs in I was in a 2-unit building in the second unit, not in a very good neighborhood. And I had my sign out front, and there was only one way in and out, through that staircase that came up from the front door. And I was the only person hosting this broker's tour. And so I had left the front door open with my sign there. And I made it a point to stand in the window and look down and watch my traffic that was coming. Okay. And unfortunately, it wasn't the greatest neighborhood. I saw some kind of sketchy people walk by, and I saw them kind of walk across the street and look at the neighborhood and look at me and look at the sign and I got really bad vibes. I got super bad vibes. So I ran down the stairs and I locked the door. And guess what? Just as I was locking the front door, they were walking up the path. Okay. So not to say that they would have done anything harmful. Maybe they were just checking out the property, but I just didn't feel like it was safe. Okay. So when I knocked on the door, I didn't let them in. And then when the next brokers came, there was nobody around. They could have waited, but I just got that really creepy vibe. Okay, so don't ever not trust your gut when you're in a house. Okay, it's important to really read these safety tips and just be really careful.
We unfortunately, Rebecca, up here in Fort Collins area years ago, we had one of I call our sister agents, that was abducted from an open house. So the awareness in our community up here is extremely high.
Right.
And not only for traffic to be good for our sellers, I typically will invite my friends to stop by.
Yeah.
Because activity breeds activity.
Yeah.
So I can't even tell you how many open houses my best friend has come to. Because
Right.
I'll say, hey, I'm sitting this open house today, especially new construction, when there's lots of homes that are vacant as well. You want to be really careful about that. And also with open house, the safety tip too is that people come in and they prey on properties for narcotics. They'll come in. We had a big sting that happened down in Boulder a few years ago where there were people that were going to open houses. They would go in and raid medicine cabinets. So I would make sure that if I was in a situation where I felt like that might be something, again, following the intuition, I would have somebody come co-host the open house with me.
That's a great idea. You can always ask a lender. Lenders don't mind. They love to co-host open houses. Find a lender who wants to do that with you, because then they can come prepared with some mortgage information and you can co-host together. That's a great idea. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Just always be aware of your safety, you guys. Super important. Okay, so here's something that I don't know how prevalent it is in other areas, but here in the Bay Area, the listing agents can get a little, I don't want to say unwelcoming, but they want to know in advance if you're going to a broker's tour, if you're bringing a client. Some listing agents or clients are welcome. They put it in the comments that clients are welcome, but maybe sometimes in luxury high-end houses, because they feel like they're really vetting the people who are seeing the property. If I'm planning on taking a client with me on broker's tours here in the Bay Area, I'll just kind of make sure that the agents are all okay with that. Okay. I don't see why not. From my point of view, if I'm hosting a broker's tour, I may as well be hosting an open house. So if I'm the listing agent, what I'll do is sometimes when I'm putting the broker's tour into the MLS, I'll also take that time frame and I'll make it an open house. Okay, because then the syndicated sites like Zillow and Redfin will pick that up as an open house, and that means anybody is welcome. Okay.
And I actually sold a house that way for my sellers. We had a broker open, and the broker called, or one of the agents called and said, "Can I bring my client with me?" And it was a barbecue, and the client that they had they were there chit chatting, asking all of the agents questions about the neighborhood, about Fort Collins, and ended up buying it.
Oh,
worked out beautiful.
I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think open houses are great. I think that, the more you can use that tool, it just makes you available to the public. It gets you talking to people, right? Even if it's just a couple of people, if your open house is slow, at least you talk to somebody. All right, here's a good idea. You can post a sign rider where it says open at a certain time. Like do that a couple days before so that the people driving by and the neighbors know. You're going to get a lot of neighbors who are going to want to come and be looky-loos, and that's how you get more sellers, right?
I was going to say that has been my best return on investment as far as advertising goes.
Yeah.
I'll put out the open house sign writers the week before, and typically I'll get more people that will say that they saw it there versus even online.
Right. Yeah. And, everybody wants the neighbors to come. Whenever a neighbor comes to my open house, I ask them, "Hey, how did you find me? Are you out shopping, or are you a neighbor?" And they'll confess that they're a neighbor. And I say, "Don't worry. I love neighbors. I want neighbors because I know that you want to keep an eye on the market on your neighborhood. So come on in, so you want those neighbors." And I used to have a mentor that told me that every time I had a listing, I wanted to get another listing from that listing. Mm-hmm. Okay, so keep it going, get another listing, talk to the neighbors, door knock the neighbors, anything you need to do to make sure that they know that you have a property for sale.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Rebecca?
Yeah.
Sorry, I was just going to stop you. Fidel had a question. Besides title, where else can I retrieve the seller info data?
The tax records. And so if you are in your MLS and you go to the tax records function, you can look up the property and you can find out who is on title as the seller. Okay, Fidel. And so you're using the parent. I think you're using the same MLS that I do. If you want me to show you how to do that, reach out to me after. But at the top of your MLS tools, there's going to be a tax button. And those are called tax records. And the tax records is that's information that's being pulled directly from the county assessor's office. Okay, sometimes our tax records here in California are not 100% accurate. They always come with that disclaimer. Okay, and keep in mind that sometimes the house may have a record of being built at a certain date and having a certain number of bedrooms and a certain number of bathrooms, and maybe somebody along the way changed that. And so your tax records may not actually match what the property actually is. Okay, so that's why we attribute our square footage and we attribute certain information because, especially if we have different measurements, right? Okay, let's see. Provide
Rebecca, excuse me. I think Fidel also mentioned something about asking about non-listed properties, and I believe it's the same in California as in Colorado, that if we do access that public records through our MLS, it is not only for properties that are listed. That's for all properties. It's a public records link that takes us out of our MLS to the actual assessor's office tax records information. So is that the same way it is in California?
Yep, definitely. Right. It could test all the tax records. You can search per county because all of our information is not private, you guys. If we own property, we're out there on the public record as being property owners. So anybody can search that entire database anywhere in the country. Okay, and that's actually a whole nother topic. We could talk about how to best use that database for your farming, for when you're trying to get seller leads. Okay, but that's kind of a different class, but I'm happy to talk about farming at some point too. But tax records are really important to kind of look at. And since we're on that topic, another thing that we can do here in the Bay Area is we have certain counties, depending on what county you're in, they maintain a database in their system in their county building department. And for instance, in San Francisco has a building department where we can look up a property and we can see online all of the permits that were taken out at the time. And it has to kind of coincide with disclosure that were given by the seller. So there's a lot of information that's out there if you know how to find it. Okay, I'm happy to help you guys do that. And just ding me, private message me and I'll help you. Okay, back to hosting showings, just one final thing, always want to make sure that you're going to give feedback, especially from your open houses, especially from your private showings. Your sellers want to know how it's going. Your sellers want to know what the buyer said. They want to know that the buyer loved it, or maybe they don't want to know that the buyer didn't like something. But it's your time when you're there doing showings and open houses to talk to people and gather that information so that you can go to your client after and you can say, hey, everybody loved it, except the fact that it has 4 flights of stairs was a little, people said it was very vertical. So I mean, you're going to want to try to give feedback to your client whenever you do showings or open houses, because they really need that information, and it helps you look very professional, like you're on top of it, like you're talking to people, you're communicating with people, who like the property and who didn't like the property. So you definitely want to make sure that you're giving feedback every single time. Oh, and one more thing, if you're hosting an open house for somebody else, make sure that if you are hosting an open house and you are not the listing agent, you're just doing it to help or get clients, you want to make sure that you're giving feedback to the listing agent right away. Okay, if your open house is from 2 to 4, you're calling that listing agent at 4:15. Okay, you need to be giving feedback. You can't just not give the listing agent feedback, because that listing agent then has to talk to that client. Okay, so be aware of providing feedback. It's very important. Okay.
Rebecca, one thing I just want to interject on that is the feedback from people actually coming through the house has always been beneficial for things like, it smells like cat in this house.
Mhm.
Because those are things I can't see on the MLS. I can't tell you it's a bi-level. I can't tell you it only has 2-car garage. I can't tell you it's located on a busy intersection. When people actually come through, they can say things like, oh, it does smell like cat, or, I'm not so sure about that dead tree out back. Can you give me more information about that? So those are the specific feedback items that I look for and I listen to from folks when they come through open house.
Yeah. Getting feedback as a listing agent is, one of the things that's going to help you talk to the seller when it comes down to trying to, negotiate, or, should we take this price or should we reduce the price? So the feedback is really important to make sure that you have. And if you are in a really, really busy market, you should be keeping a log of who is coming through the house. Okay, if you're using a lockbox, yes, definitely you're going to have a log of who accessed your lockbox. But if you are doing private showings, you want to be able to keep a log. And I had a very, very picky seller client, and she was on me every single showing. She wanted feedback immediately. And the house was on the market for, unfortunately, 30 or 40 days, which didn't seem like it was that long in some markets. But here in San Francisco, she was kind of like getting nervous. And we had to go through the spreadsheet. I had to have a spreadsheet of every single person who looked at the property, because then if you do a price adjustment, you can go back and you can easily contact all those people and let them know that you've done a price adjustment. So as a listing agent, be organized, keep track of who you're showing the property to and their feedback. Okay. Talking about promoting your listing and where to market. So this is a fun slide, because, you guys, kind of marketing is like any kind of marketing you want. I mean, the sky's the limit. But we wanted to kind of put this together just to show you what is considered kind of standard industry marketing that you would be expected to provide. Okay, it's very standard. Agents typically pay for your marketing unless you write it in the listing agreement. Okay, so perhaps you have a scenario where you have this seller who you think is going to be a little difficult, and she only wants to list her property for 60 days, but yet she wants you to pay for everything. And she's like, well, I want you to, pay for extra print advertising. I want you to pay for the video tour, and I want you to pay for all these additional things. What you could do is you could say to that seller, sure, perhaps you don't mind paying for those things, but you're going to pay her at the close of escrow out of your commission. You don't want to have to take on that burden of paying for things up front if you're not 100% sure that the property is going to sell. Okay, so just keep in mind that there's some standard things which people expect us to provide, which is going to be professional photography, don't cheap out and use your personal phone from your iPhone photos. It's just not as good as professional photography. People can tell, other agents can tell, believe me. Use professional photography. They know what they're doing. They adjust the light. They make everything look so much better. Okay. You're going to want to do full color brochures. You can get away with maybe a 1-pager. You can do a 4-pager, depending on, you judge what the property needs and how to best highlight that property. But you're going to want to do a full color brochure. And I know that due to COVID, nobody had to do any brochures in like the last year and a half because we weren't allowed to give out paper. But I'm starting to see some brochures come back into our market. Okay. You could also try to do those digitally if you wanted to, but it just doesn't have the same impression. Remember, when you are hosting an open house, you're trying to get other people to list with you. Neighbors are going to come and see what you have on your table. And that's, one of the reasons that you want to appear really professionally prepared with things that are going to highlight your services. And having brochures is one of those services. Okay. You're going to want to do social media postings, which we can do here. If you want to subscribe to KV Core or our middle tier subscription, we do some Facebook postings for you, social media postings. Sorry, do your own social media posting. Put that listing out there wherever you think it's going to be great. Highlight your listing, and then finally you're going to want to put a for sale sign on the property. Okay, so those are just some standard stuff that every client is going to expect. And then what some additional things are, as Amber mentioned kind of earlier in our presentation, is that we can do a floor plan. And that's an additional one. Sometimes you have to pay to get things like that done. You can do a Matterport tour. You can do a 3D video tour, depending on how you think the property will present. You can definitely do a single property website that you can use everywhere with your call to action. Click here for more information. Contact me for a showing. You can send your postcards. We want to send neighborhood postcards. And you also, while you're sending neighborhood postcards, make sure you're including your past client list in your own personal mailing list. Okay, so everybody knows you have a listing. You can send out what we call email blasts, which are emails to other agents, your sphere of influence, and once again, your past clients. And so all of these things are things that you can be doing. There's no ever any specific checklist for marketing. Okay, you can be doing anything that you think is going to work for you. Print advertising, okay, drone videos and photography, anything that you can do to be creative and kind of set that property apart. You can do TikTok videos. You can, lip sync to songs in the house or whatever. But, if you think that it's a good idea to try to market your property, then, do it. Be classy, but do it. Right?
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. Next, reviewing offers. Okay, this is a fun one. So now you've done all this wonderful marketing and you're starting to get action. You're starting to get people who are coming back twice to see it. That people are interested when they come back more than once. That they're really interested when they bring their family members and their friends. So you definitely, that's why you want to keep track of who's coming into the house and trying to get feedback. And then you're going to get ready to, maybe look at offers. Right. And so say that you just put the property on the market and it's really only been on the MLS for, 2 or 3 days, and you get someone who wants to write you an offer. Well, then, you should probably go to your seller and you should have a conversation with your seller about do they feel that they want to take an offer as it comes, or do they want to set a date? Okay. And so it depends on the market that you're in. Obviously, you're going to be in a very active market like San Francisco. Sometimes we set a date. But sometimes what we do is we just put the property out there and we gauge our activity, right? And then we say, okay, well, if it's been really busy, then, maybe we know that we need to set an offer date, or, maybe we're going to give it 2 weekends of open houses, and we're going to make sure that we let the public see it for 2 weekends of open houses, So you have to really have that conversation with your seller about judging the level of activity and how you're going to handle agents who come to you and ask you about, what you're doing about offers.
Rebecca, I had something that was directly applicable to this situation this past week. There was another agent that actually set a deadline for the multiple offers to be in by a certain date. Mm-hmm. And, people were going to be, a few minutes late or 20 minutes late in actually uploading their offer. And this agent got really upset over it. And legally in the state of Colorado, as a listing agent, I have to continue to present all offers
Right.
to my sellers until it actually sells, closes, and is posted. And so I think the key factor in this learning lesson is that we specifically say to the sellers, do you or do you not want to accept any offers after the deadline date? So if I put into MLS that all offers will be reviewed on Monday at 5 p.m., I have to have it in my listing agreement that says from the seller, I will not look at any other offers after 5 p.m. on Monday.
Interesting. Interesting.
Yeah, because otherwise I can be held liable as the listing agent. Let's say you call me and you have an offer coming in and I text back to you, sorry, Rebecca, I'm already sitting here in front of my sellers. Don't send me your offer.
That's a no-no. You should definitely receive all offers.
Problem. Yep.
Yeah, interesting. We do that here also. You know, we definitely have to present all offers as they're sent to us. Sometimes what will happen is we'll be opposite. We have to have the seller give us written instructions that they will not look at an offer prior to a certain time frame, because we'll get, you know, these agents who are preemptive offers is what we call them. And so you'll get agents who want to be extremely aggressive and say that their buyer wants the house, and they'll give you this wonderful big offer with a very short response time frame because they're putting pressure on you to take that preemptive offer. And so what happens is, you know, if you have already talked to your seller and you've agreed that you're setting an offer date for the future, and if you've advertised that, then you're kind of in an awkward position now, because you have to present that offer to your seller, but you're also kind of going back on your word to all the other agents who have seen that offer date as a certain time frame, and they're thinking they have some time, right? And so what we do as listing agents here, we have to have that conversation with our client to be very firm. Are you going to take an offer on a certain time frame, or will you look at offers as they come? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And then it takes the liability off of us as agents and puts the onus back on the client seller, that whatever they're telling us what to do, then it's not about me being a mean agent. No, I'm not going to take your offer, Rebecca, or me making that decision for my sellers. Like, here, I want to give this to you early, or let this agent come in and show it earlier. It takes all of that away. So it's not me as Amber, the agent, making the decision. It's the seller making the decision.
Exactly. Yes, definitely. It has to be the seller, and it needs to be in writing. And so some of the agents here in our MLS, we will put into the agent comments that the seller has requested no offers prior to 5 o'clock Monday. We have it in writing. So that the aggressive agents won't be pushing these preemptive offers on them. Okay. Because believe me, if you are a listing agent and you set an offer date, and then you go ahead and something happens and your seller takes an offer prior to your offer date, you are going to get called out. And, you know, people remember that, your colleagues remember that. So, you know, if something like that happens, obviously, if you're in that position, you need to, you know, handle it or call me and I'll walk you through it. But definitely, once you say you've given word about something, stick with your word. Okay, get it in writing. It's obviously always the seller's choice. Okay, now having said that, maybe they do set an offer date. Someone comes and says, hey, I'm going to give you $1 million over your asking price, and you need to decide today. You know, it's the seller's choice. And so it happens. Not to say it doesn't happen, but, you know, you definitely need to be having a conversation with your seller and making sure that that's their decision, right? And get it in writing. Everything, you need to get it in writing, right? It's going to protect you in the long run, you know. Okay. So say that you're in a situation and you have an offer date, and all of a sudden now you have, I don't know, let's say 4 or 5 offers on the same property. How do you best present that to your seller client? You know, so the seller client obviously is just looking at these contracts, and to them it's just a bundle of papers. They don't really know what to look at. They don't know what's important to read. You know, most of them just want us to give them the kind of like the breakdown of the offers. And so as I receive offers, I put it on a spreadsheet. Okay, depending on when I'm getting it, I might send it immediately to the seller if it's my time frame. If I'm getting it and my time frame is 5 o'clock, I have to put it on the spreadsheet, send it to my client. I would label it offer number 1, and I put it on a spreadsheet, and I say, these are my terms of the contract that we're looking at. We're looking at the price. You know, we're looking at how much of it is a down payment, how much of a loan are they getting, an 80% loan? Are they not getting a loan? I know Amber here put in an escalation clause, which I'm going to just note in California, we are not seeing very many of these. They're just not locally used as much. Not to say I've never come across it, because I have, but here in California, they're kind of frowned upon, but people still do it. If you want to talk about that, you can call me. But do you guys have escalation clauses in Colorado?
We have them all the time. I see them in almost
Okay.
every contract.
Okay, yeah, definitely not something that is a standard operating procedure here in the Bay Area. Not to say, I would never say never, but you may get the listing agents who are going to give you pushback on that. They're going to call you and say, hey, just send me your best offer. We're not going to deal with escalation clauses here. So interesting, but I know a lot of other states do. Yeah. Okay, so then you're going to take on your comparison sheet and you're going to put down how much money did the buyer have down, how much money are they putting in earnest money. Here in California, it's 3%. There's a reason we use 3%. And when you come to the contract class, part 1, we're going to talk about the contract, and I'll talk about why we use 3%. You're going to want to know how much is the deposit down. You're going to want to pay attention to when is the possession date. Is it close of escrow? And DOD is what, Amber?
Delivery of deed.
The delivery of deed, same thing as close of escrow. Okay. And then maybe there's a post-closing occupancy situation, which is very common when the seller is still living in the house. Okay, if you have a seller who's still living in the property, they may ask for a post-closing occupancy agreement. We call that a rent back, although at one point I had a broker who said, don't ever call it a rent back. It's a permission to remain after the close of escrow. And the reason we didn't want to say rent back was only because we didn't want to establish that, that image of being a landlord-tenant situation here in California. It's crazy. Anyway, you want to look at the terms of the offers, and you want to determine what are the terms, what are we comparing? Are there any inclusions? Are there any exclusions? How about inspections? What about contingencies? Are they doing a short time frame? Are they going to remove their contingency in a longer time frame? Who can be fastest? Okay, so my clients are always looking for things like the highest, the best, and the easiest, right? So the highest amount of money, the best terms, and I guess that goes along with easiest. Like, we don't want contingencies if possible, or very short contingencies. That's what a seller's dream offer is, right? Like no contingencies, right? So you as a listing agent are helping the seller determine, looking at all these things. You're also going to be looking at whether or not they're going to include an appraisal contingency. A lot of people waive that. If your buyer's offer has a waiver of appraisal contingency, you're going to want to have a conversation with that buyer's agent and say, hey, make sure that you and I are on the same page about waiving that appraisal contingency, because if it doesn't appraise, have you had a conversation with your buyer yet how they're going to overcome any gap, okay, in the appraisal. Yeah.
The other thing on that appraisal gap is we want to make sure, is it a one-way appraisal gap or is it a two-way appraisal gap? Make sure that we understand and define what is it that this other agent is saying that this buyer is willing to do. It's gotten very complicated, and on my Monday Colorado connections, we can go through this and spend another whole hour on it. So if you have questions, please reach out.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Appraisal gaps are definitely hard to understand. And I love it that you said, make sure you're confirming exactly what that means, right? Because I had a situation here where someone had an appraisal gap, and it came, I don't know, said something about the appraisal the buyer will pay $5,000 over the appraised price. But then when the appraisal came in low, the buyer wanted to pay $5,000 over the appraised price and figured that the deal was just going to continue going forward based on that assumption. And I was like, well, no, that's like you said, that must be a one-way versus a two-way situation, right? It's like, just because the appraisal came in, low, and you're going to pay $5,000 doesn't automatically mean that the seller has to accept that, right? And so that's why it's really important to hammer out what it means when someone does something having to do with the appraisal contingency. Make sure you're talking to that buyer's agent. You can go ahead and take all these offers that you're getting and putting them on the sheet. And sometimes if there's a lot of offers, what will happen is The listing agent will get the offers, they'll evaluate them, then they're going to pick the top 2, 1, 2, 3, whatever, and they're going to call those buyer's agents and they're going to talk to them about that offer. And they're also maybe going to say, hey, is this the best your buyer can do? Would you be open for a counter? Right?
Yep.
Because then you're having that verbal back and forth. Okay. So everything comes to you in writing first, and then most of the time it moves to verbal. Okay. No, just remember, verbal is not a binding contract though. And so you need to remember, be careful about what you're saying and face things the right way, ask the right questions. And just because someone says, sure, I'm going to come up, I'll pay $1 million over, doesn't mean it's on the phone, doesn't mean anything. It all has to be in writing. Okay. So then what you're going to do is you're going to evaluate what you've got. You're going to talk to your seller and you're going to say, hey, do any one of these agent offers stand out to you? How do you feel about these offers? What would you like to see happen? These are your options. You can choose one, you can counter one, or you can multiple counter more than one. Okay. And here in California, we have a form for that. It's a multiple counter offer form. You do not have to counter all of those people the same. You can counter buyer number 1 differently than you need to counter buyer number 2 or buyer number 3. Okay, so this is all something that we're going to talk about when we talk about our forms class. Okay, but just remember, as a listing agent, you are the one that's evaluating, and then you're helping the seller decide what they want to do. Okay.
I'm so glad we do not have multiple counter offers. That would give me indigestion and more gray hair.
Yeah, it's definitely a scenario that can get a little crazy sometimes. I mean, especially when you're dealing with multiple counter offers and you're sending out multiple counter offers, and say that you have sent out maybe 3 multiple counter offers, and then you're waiting for them to come back to you, and you've given them until maybe 5 o'clock tomorrow. Right. But then buyer number 1 comes back and says, well, I really want this house. I'm going to give you $1 million over asking, but you have to make the decision within an hour. And so what that buyer has just done is undercut their other competition by giving you that really short time frame to respond. Okay. And so what you do as a listing agent is you say, okay, let me talk to my clients. Hold on. And then you call your clients, and then you call the other 2 buyers agents and you tell them right away. Right? Because now you never know what the seller is going to decide to do, but it's your kind of obligation to try to get the best price for your seller. So you have to communicate that you've been given this short time frame to the other agents so they can talk to their buyers. So it gets a little kind of eluded. Yeah, but it's definitely an interesting part of our job. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. One more thing to talk about before we move on. In California, if you are a listing agent and you are representing a buyer, and maybe an unrepresented buyer comes to your open house and says, oh, I love this property. Will you represent me? Well, obviously that's a dual agency here in California. So if you are a listing agent and you are also writing an offer on your own property, and it's a multiple offer situation, okay, meaning you're not the only offer. There's going to be another buyer coming from another brokerage, or maybe even our brokerage or whatever, but it has to be a multiple offer situation. You as a listing agent cannot represent a buyer without getting your manager involved. Okay, and there's a reason we do that here in California. It's because we as a brokerage want to be seen as handling our situations with integrity. And we don't want another brokerage, another buyer from another agent from another brokerage saying that somehow we stack the deck in our favor by being a dual agent in a multiple offer situation. Okay, because you know that a lot of agents will do that. Obviously, they're going to make their offer the best, and they're taking offers from other buyers agents from other brokerage, and they're looking at what they've got, because that's not ethical and that's not treating anybody fairly. And so a way to put a buffer in place to not get accused of unfairness is to have your manager involved. And you would call me or another manager and say, hey, I'm taking offers Friday at 5 o'clock, but I'm representing my own buyer. I'm going to have all the offers sent to you, the manager. So that means that listing agent does not see any offers except for the one they're writing, and all of the offers go to the manager. And then the manager gets involved and helps the seller evaluate. Okay, so the reason I'm saying that is just because I like to maintain our reputation, and I don't want to ever be accused that our radius agent did something shady in a dual agency capacity. Okay, so always remember that. And I know agency laws are different in each state, Amber. So
yes, we do not allow dual agency.
Yeah.
Yay.
That's great. Yeah, problem
And
off the
part of
table.
that, and that's why the state of Colorado ruled that years ago. So yeah,
Yeah.
we do not allow dual agency. So you're either a seller's agent and you treat that customer as a customer, or you transfer it from seller agency to transaction broker.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I know a lot of states don't allow dual agency. And I have to say that I want to say a large percentage of the lawsuits that happen in California are going to involve agency, some sort of agency relationship, wrong step or mistake or misinterpretation or misrepresentation or anything like that. And so dual agency is really a hot topic for us in any brokerage. You know, we're going to be extra careful if you are a dual agent, because those are the things that have a higher percentage of lawsuits happening in a dual agency situation. So if you ever are in a dual agency situation, please, if you need any help, don't hesitate to reach out to a manager. Okay. All right, next. We are cruising right along, and I know this is long. Let's kind of get through this real quick. Ooh, lots of talking, getting through the escrow process. Okay, quickly, and I know that we talked about, we had a class 2 weeks ago. It was about, hey, an accepted offer, now what? That was kind of from the buyer's point of view. This is a little bit more from the seller's point of view, but some of the steps are going to be the same, okay? When you get a signed contract, you're obviously going to want to take a copy of that signed contract and send it to the title company. You're going to want to make introductions to your clients, to the escrow officer, to the lender and the escrow officer, to your TC and your clients and the escrow officer. Okay, so everybody at that point gets to meet each other, because you're all going to be working together as a team. And I know that, Amber, you said this last time at our last class, is like sometimes you want to make one email and introduce everybody at once, right? So everybody knows who everybody is. Okay, your transaction coordinator, if you are working with one, should then put together a calendar of events, which is going to be like, when is the deposit due? When are the disclosures supposed to be completely given to us? When are the contingency timeframes, and what's the close of escrow? Okay, it's really important, if you are not using a TC, to create a calendar of events, or at least a timeline of events, and make sure that your client knows that and sends that. You send that to them, because once again, it maintains your professionalism and your standards of practice. You want to make sure that you have set forth the calendar of events, and then you want to make sure that you're giving that calendar to the other side, and that their calendar of events is matching your calendar of events. Okay, you want to all be on the same page when it comes to timeframes. Okay. You definitely want to get all of your disclosures signed and sent to the transaction coordinator. And so I know, once again, when we are exchanging documents back and forth, obviously the seller fills out the disclosures, gives the disclosures to the buyer's side. The buyer's side reviews everything, signs it, sends it back. Okay, and so it's the TC's job to kind of facilitate that back and forth. However, it's ultimately the agent's responsibility to know what you're missing and what you have and what's in the works. Okay, you want to make sure that that buyer's agent is doing their agent visual inspection disclosure, and that's done in California. If you are a listing agent, you might get asked to host inspections, depending on whether or not the property is on the lockbox or not. And so I know that it's different state by state, but here in California, sometimes the listing agent does go to the inspection, and I usually go to an inspection, but I stay away. I'm there because I'm there to represent the property and to open the door and be there, especially if it's not on a lockbox. But I'm also there to kind of be, if there's any questions, but I don't hover. I want to make myself I need to separate myself from the inspector. Sometimes I might sit outside or sit in the car or sit in the lobby or whatever, right? But I'm not hovering during their investigations, right? You're going to provide buyers with inspectors to choose from. Oh, you added this one, Amber. Do you guys do that?
Yeah, actually, I will send over my clients a list, at least 3, if not more, inspectors, and say, you know, would you like to go ahead and call them and have them schedule the inspection? If the buyer wants to go and meet with them, then that's great. So, and I know this is on sellers, but so we typically have the buyer's agent coordinate the inspector, and then they will schedule that through our showing time, just as if it's another agent coming in and doing a showing on a property.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, sometimes it's helpful to share those vendors and those resources with the other side. Remember, you as a listing agent and that buyer's agent, you guys are a team now. You are both wanting, it's like a two-legged race, right? You want to get that property closed over the finish line. And so always try to be helpful versus unhelpful. Okay. Here in California, usually the listing agent hosts the appraisal if applicable, if there's not a lockbox. If there is a lockbox, sometimes you might want to make sure that before the appraiser comes, that you go to the house and you make it look nice and you take out any reports or pest report or anything that you've left at the property, kind of, make it ready for the appraiser to come. And the reason I say that is I know in the old days, we used to have printouts of all of our disclosure packages, and the pest report and the home inspection would be at the property. And we always made it a point, before the appraiser came, to kind of whisk that away, right? So that the appraiser wasn't tempted to kind of look at all the things on the property. Because if an appraiser ever asks you for reports, you're going to want to ask them why they need them. Okay, so here in California, it's not really typical that an appraiser would ask you for any disclosures or reports. So, be careful when you're sharing certain things with your appraiser or your lender. We can talk more about that if anybody wants to call me. Okay, so then.
And then also, just so you know too, that this is when, if we have comps that we want to leave at the property for the appraiser to go ahead and take a look at, we can do that. We're not able to, quote, influence them, but we are able to make their job easier.
Right.
So we can give them line item by line item. Here's how I came up with the list price.
Right. I love that. And the other thing too, is because we're the agents and we know what's happening in the neighborhood, we might know about comps that have sold off market, or we might know about perhaps the house down the street got like 10 offers and it sold for way over asking, but it's not closed yet. So we're going to hopefully be, talking to the appraiser and giving all the information we can to help them. Right. Yeah.
Yep.
We also need to get through the negotiations. And I love it that this is just 3 words, get through negotiations, when in reality, we know it's never quite that easy, right? It gets through, getting through all the inspections and getting through any requests for repairs and negotiating what's going to happen and who's going to do it, when it's going to get done, before close of escrow, after close of escrow, how much is it going to be, who's going to pay for it. There are all these little things that go into kind of getting through the negotiation part. Yes, you have an offer. Yes, you're in contract, but your job doesn't stop there. You have to get through the rest of the transaction, right? In California, you have to verify that the buyer has removed all their contingencies, and we have a form called the contingency removal agreement. We need to have one that says all the contingencies are removed. That's like the most important part of our transaction. When you're a listing agent, you want those contingency removals because that shows that deal is moving forward. Right. And so you're looking for those contingency removals. Oh, guess what? Your contingency removal is due tomorrow. You're going to have that ready for me. Right. So you want to keep things moving forward. Okay. Same thing in Colorado, right, Amber?
Yeah, we just don't have a formalized form, but it is good practice just to make sure that we've gotten all of those dates taken care of. Everything is good to go.
Yeah. Okay. And then guess what? Now you're getting closer. You're almost done as a listing agent, because now if you're non-contingent, you're going to change the MLS so that it says pending. You're going to be non-contingent. You're like, great, what's the next step on the seller side? Well, at that point, you're going to make sure that your paperwork is complete and clean. You're going to clean up anything that's missing, making sure that all the signatures are ready and done. You might want to call and remove the staging once the property is pending. You might want to go ahead and get the staging removed. You're going to talk to your seller about certain things that they need to do in order to hand over the property. Okay. And one of those things are going to be signing their final paperwork. This is always a really important part for both the buyer and the seller. Remember that both parties have to sign their final paperwork. Okay. The buyer in California is probably going to do a final walkthrough. Do you guys do final walkthroughs in Colorado?
Yes, we do. Typically a day before or even the day of.
Yeah, exactly. I try to do it the day before. Sometimes I try to do it in conjunction when I take the seller to the title company. Actually, this is wrong. I'm talking from a buyer's point of view, but if you're representing a buyer, you might want to do the signing and the walkthrough at the same time. Okay. If you're representing a seller, you're just being aware that the buyer it has the right to do it and that it's going to be happening. Okay, you want to maybe say to the buyer, when are you going to come to your final walkthrough, because we're taking the staging out, or I'm having the property cleaned and I just want to be aware of taking the lockbox off. When are you doing your final walkthrough? As a listing agent, you're going to want to do the same thing that you do as a buyer's agent. Is you're going to want to send the final contract, escrow instructions, the contract terms to the title company. Okay, this is telling the title company how to prepare the estimated settlement statement. Okay, because the title company, yes, they have a copy of the contract. Now, so they should be looking at the contract as to who's paying what for certain things. But what if there was some sort of adjustment or credit or request for repair or something that was agreed upon during the negotiations? You need to make sure that you're giving the title company all this correct information, and you're confirming that what they have is correct. Okay, so you want to send those terms to title. Okay, at that point, the title company will have hopefully ordered any kind of loan payoff that the seller has. If the seller has a loan on their property, by then hopefully the title company's ordered the payoff demand. They're going to take that payoff demand and they're going to take the commission amount, the fees, and any transfer taxes, and then they're going to put it on an estimated settlement statement for that seller to review. And it's going to say, here's your sales price, here's what you owe for commission, here's what you owe for transfer tax, here's what you have a loan to pay off, here's some prorated property taxes, and then these are your proceeds. Okay, and then you're going to review that estimate with your seller client, and you're going to talk to the seller and say, is this what you were expecting? Okay, hopefully the seller is going to say yes, and then you're going to tell the title company it looks good. You're going to look, let's go ahead. We're going to make an appointment to sign the seller's papers. Maybe you can go to the title company with your seller to sign the papers. And then you're going to want to send a bunch of reminders to your seller about how to handle the final details, like what to do with their keys, call the utility companies to give notice that the property will be changing hand, change your address, check your mail, don't forget that the unit needs to be delivered broom clean. Why don't we get it professionally cleaned? I always recommend professionally cleaning it. Okay, it's such a better impression, to have the cupboards done and have it dusted, and try to give your property over in great condition. Okay, make sure that you as a listing agent are taking pride in that part of it. I can't tell you how many times I have taken paint cans to the dump for my sellers, right?
Yeah.
Because they leave like 10 paint cans and I'm like, well, you need to get rid of them, and they never do. And then I go there to check it one final time and there's all the paint cans. And so I'm taking the paint to the dump, but make sure that you're presenting the property to the buyer in a nice light. You're going to want to get the keys. You want something? Go ahead. Yeah.
Oh, I was just going to say, I know Nick mentioned that signing docs is before closing last time he checked. And yes, in California, I think that's what you all do there. Is that correct, Rebecca? I know here in Colorado, we have closing day that's typically the same day.
Yeah.
It's not often that we will have a seller sign prior to, or even a buyer sign prior to, unless there's like a mail out, something along those lines. Normally it's the same day.
Exactly. That's just one of the differences that we're doing two states together, you guys. So thank you for bearing with us. We're trying to combine as much information as we can. But yeah, in California, we sign a couple of days before. No, actually, you can sign the day before. Usually it's the buyers who need a couple of days because their loan documents have to go back to the bank before the loan will funds. And so seller, you can sign pretty much at the last minute. Yeah, but I know it's different in Colorado. I think it's kind of cool where you get the keys at the same time. But here, don't ever give keys too early, because I have heard of so many dramatic things that have happened from people handing over keys before the property is closed. Just don't do it, no matter how nice that buyer's agent is, no matter how inconvenient it is to give them the next day when the property is actually closed. Stick to your guns. Please do not give keys early, because I can't tell you, something will happen. The buyer will go in there, they'll start tearing things out. The seller will go to the property to have an emotional goodbye, one last time, and then they'll find the buyer in there and it's not closed yet, and then you have everybody mad at each other. Don't give keys early. Just don't. Okay. So there's that. So. All right, next, we're moving right along because we're getting almost to our very last couple of slides, you guys. Sorry, it's taking a while. After the sale, these are some things that you need to do on your to-do list. I'm just going to go through really quickly. You can see what they are. It's all basically having to do with sending thank you gifts and posting on social media and sending out postcards and letting everybody know that you are in business, that you just did business, right? I like to definitely, make sure you go through these, remove the guard sign, pick up the lockbox, get your, flyers, change the status on the MLS, make sure you're sending a closing gift, asking for a referral, or wait, send a closing gift to the client, and then maybe who gave you that client. Like I once had a client who was in a busy office and he sent me one of his colleagues, and then that colleague bought. And when that colleague bought, I sent them both gift baskets, and they were both impressed because they both got to get gift baskets at their receptionist office, because it's then everybody got to say, oh, those two people got gift baskets. Why didn't I? Right. So, do something that's going to make you stand out, send a thank you card. Make sure you put your clients on all of your lists, your past client lists, make a note of their anniversary so that you can send them, hey, you just bought your house last year. How's it been in 1 year? Make sure you add them to your Zillow profiles and social media. I talked about that. Closing package delivery to your client. Make sure your client gets the final closing statement. You guys don't forget that. That's a huge step when it comes to service. Yes, you reviewed the estimate with them. It's always going to be an estimate until the property closes. Okay, and then once the property closes, it's a final closing statement. Those are the closing documents that we get from the title company. You want to get that, and you want to send that to your client if you can right away once it closes. You also want to maybe keep it so that when tax time comes next year, you can send them a letter and say, hey, here's your final closing statement from the house you sold or bought last year. And they like that. That's customer service. Okay. Ask for reviews and referrals. I think I talked about this before. The best time to ask for reviews and testimonials is right before you close, when they're happy. Okay, because if you ask for testimonials and referrals after they close, chances are they're going to get busy, they're moving, maybe they're not going to have time, it's not going to be as important anymore, right? And so always try to figure out when the best time is to ask for your testimonials, and deactivate any virtual tours or websites, if you feel like you don't want them to be out there. And then add your move-in anniversary into your database and check mail for the seller for the last time. This is what I like too. If you have a seller, make sure that you leave a forwarding address, because what if a package arrives, and what if something happens that buyer is going to be calling you? Isn't it easier for you just to leave a forwarding address so that buyer knows how to contact that seller directly? Okay. All right. Okay, I think this is our last slide, Amber.
Yeah, client retention. Basically, we just want to say thank you. Handwritten notes are fabulous. Closing gifts, like you talked about. I've even thrown housewarming parties before for clients that have said, just so that they get to know the neighbors. Again, like you talked about, sending the final closing statement, remembering significant dates about those buyers and or sellers that you've learned along the way, that, this is their daughter's birthday or what have you. Anything like that you can remember and personalize, so that then you can keep these as client retention. Use social media, send quarterly market updates, do pop buys and drop off fun things every few months. Ask for referrals. Again, I've learned that the hard way. If I don't ask them for a referral, somebody else will. There's lots of agents out there. So communicate with past clients, meet with them, go have coffee, Google Meet, say hello if you're at a sporting event, or if you see them in the grocery store or at the gym. I know sometimes we as salespeople, it's like, okay, I'm all salesy most of the day, and if I'm taking my kid to a sporting event, maybe I don't want to reach out and say hello to all these people that I've done business with, but I have to. Mm-hmm. That's how I keep those clients. Again, anything, if there's shredding events, ice cream socials, car washes, anything like that, keep going to those. You're part of the community. Be part of their community and keep them updated on local events. So if somebody's a big car buff fan, whatever, and there's a car show in town, let them know about it. Join the clubs or organizations that you like and your clients are involved in. Mm-hmm. For example, I'm going to be joining the HOA board with one of my buyers that's closing on a property. She's like, scares me half to death to sit on this board. Will you do it with me? Mm-hmm. I was like, okay. I mean, right. That's good. It'll be great for me to learn, and it'll keep me involved with her as well. Volunteer at events hosted by your past clients. If they have fundraisers, school events, what have you, be involved. Also sponsor them. And if you can get any of your, your swag that you can give out, any of your pens, what have you, hats, water bottles, great opportunity for you to continue to market who you are and what you do. So that's the number one way to keep client retention for me.
Yeah, I agree. I think the more that you can just keep reminding them that you're out there and, asking them if they know anybody who wants to buy or sell real estate in a nice way, kind of, do it in such a way where you're not being pushy and you're not being obnoxious, but just a constant reminder that, hey, you're active, you're an active realtor, you know, you're out there, you know what's happening, you can definitely give them information, you know, and you're going to want to add them to your past client list. That's kind of a no-brainer. Make sure that you're maintaining a past client list, you guys. Your database is super important. If I had given myself the advice I should have given myself when I started this 20 plus years ago is pay attention to your database, because your past client base is your gold mine. Okay, it's most important. Just keep in contact with your clients. All right, this is our last slide. And once again, we're just going to leave you guys with some final advice on if you ever need how to find answers to anything, how to work with your TC, or I wrote here how to go to CAR and read any legal questions and answers right here. This is what you would go to, log in, and then go to Transaction Center, Q&As. And then I know that Amber, you guys have a way of finding out more information too. I mean, obviously come to us, but you know,
Right.
you can look things up, or you can come to us, but it's, you know, whichever. But I just wanted to make sure that you guys knew that, you know, there's plenty of ways to find things out. And I hope that you guys think we did a good job. Here's our comments. Does anybody have any questions? I know we went really long on this one, so thank you for hanging in there with us. And if anybody wants to go ahead and speak up, let me know. Did we cover everything, Amber?
I think so. And I want to commend you again, Rebecca. You've done such a great job, and I followed your lead on a lot of these topics and slides. And it's a lot. That's why when people, I think we mentioned the last time, when people think we are making the big bucks, well, it's because we do invest a lot of time, energy, intelligence, education into everything that we do. We don't just open the door, unlock it, and show up for closing.
Right. Yeah, there's a lot that goes into it. And I think just representing the seller is kind of like a different point of view. You know, you're obviously, you know, it's different than representing a buyer who's maybe you're running around and writing all these offers, but, you know, representing a seller, you have responsibilities that are a little bit different and just as challenging, right? But
Exactly.
it's exciting. It's exciting to be a listing agent, especially when you really like the property that you're selling. So with that, I hope that you guys got some good advice and learned a couple of things. And thank you for joining us. Anything else, Amber? I think we're good. Are we done?
I don't think so. I think putting the sold sign across your for sale sign too, one of those sold sign writers or the magnetic ones, is also a great way to end that. If your sellers will allow you to keep that up, or even the new homeowners, you know, for a day or two, I think that's fabulous.
I love that idea.
Yep.
Pending stickers or sold stickers. That's awesome.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, thank you all for showing up. We so appreciate you. And for those of you that are not on the call today, but will be watching this through our Radius Academy, thank you for showing up and investing in your business, because your business really is our business.
I love that. That's great. We do. This is pretty good. We're getting good at this. Thank you. I appreciate you. So
thank you. I appreciate you too. And thanks, Kimberly, for all of your effort as well, for keeping us on track and guiding us along the way.
All right, you guys, we're signing off. As always, reach out to us if you need anything, and happy selling. Okay.
Take care. Bye.